joined us this evening, and thank you for coming along to this webinar, which is all about using IT for green business. We are delighted to have our guest speaker tonight, Maria Diffley. And before I introduce Maria and talk about the event, just a few housekeeping. So first of all, we're going to be recording the webinar so that people who may be not able to attend will be able to catch up at a later date. When recording has been finished, BCS will edit it and make it available, and whenever we have a final version, we'll be issuing that on to the email, and it'll also be available on the BCS website. We would encourage you to ask any questions. It's a wonderful opportunity that we have to get Maria this evening to talk about this very, very topical area. And so please, if you have any questions, put them into the chat, and at the end of the session, we will go through the questions. Our format this evening is Maria is going to go through a presentation, and then we thought that to bring it to life, we'd do a case studies conversation about the end-to-end process and a couple of themes that are very relevant to ESG, and then we'll have a question and answer session. So we'll be encouraging you to put in some questions as we go through, and then we'll cover them off at the end of it. We'd also encourage you to keep your cameras off, and you're all on mute at the moment, just for ease of everybody else's convenience during the presentation. So that's the housekeeping. So welcome. Delighted that we have this chance to have Maria today. This is such a topical area, green IT, getting to net zero, and it really impacts businesses because they're under pressure from all angles to reduce their business, but also now bringing in reducing the carbon emissions. But more than that, the government targets are putting down, and they're coming across all businesses, especially in their pressures to be sure that they are addressing environmental, social, and their governance areas, and to be able to evidence how they are achieving the targets and how they can illustrate what activities they've taken to demonstrate that for the benefits to their business and for their customers as well too. So it really is helping, the ESG is helping them to improve their sustainability operations and the reputation, and also reducing costs. So what Maria is going to go through today, which is very kind of her, is to talk to us about the environmental, social, and governance, to really give us that insights that some of us may not have aware of the impact, what this means, and how businesses are reacting to it and what they need to do. Explain to us how people are going about getting to net zero and what they're doing that one. Looking at the trends of that, looking at what some companies' challenges that they're facing and the problems and solutions that they're actually adopting, and also illustrating that through the case study. It's all very well talking about the theory of this, and we all know about that, but hearing what customers are doing, and hearing what the businesses are doing, and local businesses are doing, both in Northern Ireland and globally for their actual customer base, it brings it all to life for us. So we're going to have an opportunity to hear about those case studies and organizations' journey through the ESG. So, as I mentioned, Maria Diffley has joined us. So thank you very much, Maria, for taking the time out. We really appreciate that after a hard day's work and a number of engagements. Another Zoom call to add to your list. So it's great of you to do that. So just a bit of background about Maria. So Maria has been working in sustainability for over a decade. She set up this company, SustainIQ, with her partner Liam, because they recognized the need for a solution that could help companies to navigate the complexities of measuring, monitoring, and reporting on their sustainability and ESG investments, which is very simple. It sounds very simple that they just have a solution to do that, but when you hear about what has been done, we can appreciate the actual mammoth task and what they have achieved in this period of time. So prior to working and setting up SustainIQ, Maria worked in business in the community. So she comes with a great pedigree and understanding to support people on their journey, both in the CR, working in the private, public, and voluntary sector. And she has got an MSc in sustainability and CSR. So I would like just to hand over to Maria now, and look forward to hearing the presentation on this topic. Maria, thank you very much.
Brilliant, thanks, Sinead. Yeah, I'm just delighted to be here today. I suppose, you know, joining a network like this, I'm probably going to be, I'd say, out of my depth with all the wonderful tech experience that's currently on the call. So, but I hope today from this presentation that you guys will have some takeaways in terms of what your businesses should be looking at. Maybe ask yourself whereabouts on the journey towards measuring, monitoring and reporting on your ESG impacts, and looking to see how are you using IT to help your business along that road. And of course, it's a great opportunity for us as a growing Northern Irish business, homegrown here, to be able to showcase what we're trying to do to help companies right across the UK, Ireland, and further afield globally. So, like Sinead had said, I am co-founder of SustainIQ, and myself and Liam had both worked in the sustainability space for quite a while, and we really had a real frustration with the fact that a lot of our customers and clients were often investing 5 times more in sustainability and ESG than they were on new hires, yet none of them could tell us the difference that it made to the bottom line, to the economy, to their local communities, or to the environment. And that was all down to one common theme, and that's they couldn't get their hands on the data, because sustainability or ESG or corporate responsibility, whatever you have been terming it to now, is so ingrained in so many different departments across an organisation that tends to sit in silos and we can't get our hands on it. So like Sinead had said, we went about trying to find an IT or tech solution for companies to be able to capture their data across multiple users and multiple sites, to help them improve how they measure, monitor and report on their social, environmental and economic performance. And really what we do, we aggregate the data if it exists already. If it doesn't, we provide a means for the capture of that data. We provide expertise for the complex carbon and social value calculations through our software, giving customers, that real peace of mind in the accuracy of their reporting. And then we offer customers touch of a button reports and access to analytics to help them to report on contracts, legislation and to funders. And as a result, of course, then our customers and clients are able to make smarter decisions. They win more business by increasing their competitive advantage. They save on money, they build trust, and they ultimately reduce risk. So I suppose where to start, the easiest place to start today, I guess, is understanding what is ESG. So ESG stands for environmental, social and governance. And these are essentially 3 broad areas with which we categorise a sustainable or responsible business investment. Previously, these would have been used interchangeably with corporate social responsibility or ethical business practices or sustainability. And really, the difference in this terminology now, ESG, is that it's more commercially linked to strategic business planning and more market driven. But what do we actually mean when we talk about ESG? What's included in it? So if we look under the environmental side of things, we're really looking at all of your GHG emissions, okay? That doesn't just include carbon. There are lots of, other GHG, lots of other gases that we need to capture as well. But that's broken down into scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, what you have control over and what you don't, essentially. We have waste management, water, biodiversity, what conservation efforts you're making, noise, dust and vibration as well. In the social side of things, we really want to look at what social impact do you actually have on your own staff and your own employees, and that might be through quantifying what difference do training and health and well-being initiatives have. What difference does your equality, diversity and inclusion strategies have on your staff? And it's about quantifying them and both qualitatively and quantitatively showcasing the difference that you're making there to your own employees. Equally, it looks at what you're doing within the supply chain. So more and more, it's easier for us to quantify what we're doing within our own businesses, but we also have a responsibility to impact and to bring along our supply chains with us. And that might be something as simple as creating pre-qualification questions that ask the question, do you have, environmental standards? Do you report to ISO 14001 or 9001, for instance? And getting that information from them, putting certain parameters in place for them to have to report back to you on their impacts. And then also we're looking at community. So really looking at what's the social impact we have through our businesses in our local communities through community initiatives, volunteering, responsible leadership. So are our leaders getting out into the community and inspiring others in how they act? And then in terms of the governance side of things, really, we're looking at how do we procure responsibly? So again, looking at the socio-economic impact of our procurement policies. Are we procuring locally? Are we putting the money back into our local communities? Making sure that ESG is actually at a board level is represented, and then making sure that we have a raft of policies and transparency around how we operate for things like modern slavery, sustainability policies, and everything in between. So that's just to give you kind of a broad scope of what's included in ESG. But I guess we came up with this solution because it was very early on that we realized there was a raft of complexities in reporting on ESG. Because so many different departments are responsible for it, getting your hands on the data is actually a nightmare. It took weeks of painful data hunting to even pull together a very basic sustainability report. And then when you actually finally did get your hands on the info that you needed, you were invariably getting the wrong type of data or unclean data. And it wasn't consistent in its measurement units or values or timescales. So, and then what we realize, and we hear every single day from talking to organisations, is that they're really struggling now with the pace at which the climate change agenda and ESG is moving. And they just don't really have the in-house resource to keep up to speed with that. And they know the costs of bringing in consultants to do that is beyond what they have. So we found that more organisations were realising actually that they need to make a business case for investing in ESG. And outside the business, they need to show the impact of their operations on their people, their community, and the environment as well. And there's lots of different drivers from compliance, the monetization of carbon through carbon taxes that are coming down the road, the risk management of supply chains, stakeholder expectations. But all of that essentially is what's driving people to try to capture and trust the data so that they can analyze this data, see trends, and then critically they'll be able to ensure that they're meeting targets going forward. Lots of companies have been setting net zero targets into 2030, 2050, and it's frightening the amount of companies that don't actually know where their baselines are today, yet they're putting out those statements into the public realm. So I thought this was a good slide just to show how many different departments, job roles, and how many different areas of your business actually rely on ESG data. So the people within the data that's in Sustain IQ, we see directors, contracts and project managers, design managers, bid or estimating departments, business development departments, compliance departments, finance, HR, marketing, PR and comms, all having the responsibility of either gathering the data in the first place or actually then using it to report further. And obviously then, simply put, ESG is essentially making your businesses more competitive, saving you time, building trust and reducing your risk. So in terms of key drivers, internationally, governments are driven to enact legislation to play their part in agreements like the Paris Agreement or to keep up with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Nationally, then, companies above a certain turnover have to submit carbon outputs with their financial returns, and we see that through the likes of the SECR or ESOS regulations. Companies are very aware now that carbon taxes are really not too far down the line. And if they don't understand what their impacts and baselines are today, how would they be able to assess the financial implications of those taxes into the future? Commercially, efforts and processes that are needed actually to stay compliant with legislation are really costing companies really valuable resources. And obviously that time will be much better spent getting out there and winning new business rather than reporting for compliance purposes. Climate change, I suppose, has proved to many people that there are real insecurities in their supply chains. We've between climate change and all that's going on in Russia as well at the moment, we can see how fragile supply chains are. So being able to manage those and ensure that we have an index of risk across our supply chains, both for environmental and ethical purposes, will ensure that we have stronger supply chains into the future. There's a lot more pressure now from stakeholders and shareholders, from clients, from your future workforce, and also from the likes of banks for access to finance. There's a really interesting stat that by 2025, 75% of the workforce will be millennials, and over 80% of those millennials that were surveyed in a recent PwC study said they would actually forego a higher salary to work for a company that had ESG standards and morals. So again, that just goes to show you, if we're going to stay competitive in the labour market, we're going to have to showcase our ESG credentials. So what we see is that ESG sustainability is not a bolt-on anymore. It's not a nice to have commercially. We need to have access to reliable sustainability and performance data. And really, you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen now, there's some hot topics here. So what we're looking at here is, what are the PQQ and tender requirements for increased competitiveness? Everyone is talking about their journey towards net zero. You can't get there if you don't know where you are today, and you also will need to be reporting on your how you're progressing towards your targets. We also see a lot more asking for the social return on investment. So whether that's within a company investing in particular projects or coming from PQQs and tenders. We're looking at our responsible supply chains. Where can we buy low carbon products and materials rather than the ones that we're currently procuring? And then also, even within the likes of construction, for instance, we're seeing that recently even an IT company that procured a building here in Belfast demanded that it was BREEAM Excellent, which is the sustainability standard for it. So even companies, that aren't involved in the building process, they're buying the properties or leasing the properties, are now saying, we want buildings that are compliant into the future and aren't going to cost us a fortune to run. So in terms of the procurement process then, it's really, really important, I guess, to understand where this has been driven from. So up to 20% of a quality submission now in bid or tender can be focused on the sustainability elements. Obviously, it's critical that you back up your responses with evidence. So for instance, in the environmental side of things, carbon reduction plans now need to be completed in accordance with new regulation PPN 0621, and they have to be displayed online. In terms of social return on investment, we have to be able to back up the number of weeks we have apprenticeship or placements on site, for instance. And then in terms of your governance, being able to showcase your supply chain vulnerabilities and ensuring you're upskilling your supply chain around what your new requirements are. I suppose arguably this would be the biggest driver, the procurement process and the advantages of being more competitive within public procurement. But also that's in terms of sustainability there. But actually last year we saw that we have a mandate now across all public contracts in the UK for up to, or minimum, sorry, of 10% weighting for social value. So and that's a minimum. We're seeing a lot of the local councils actually pushing that closer to 20% as well. So there's a potential there for up to 40% of the submission now, which will be sustainability and social impact related. In terms of stakeholder expectations, we see the public sector were really pushing initially for the regulation and all around sustainability being included in that. But actually private sector clients have been following suit at a real serious rate, because I guess they want to be able to report through their supply chains as well. Retaining and attracting the talent, like I said, is going to be important going forward. But equally, in an age of very easily accessible information through social media, it's so easy to scrutinise anything that you put out, any publications that you put out. And in one of our case studies later, we can go through what the reputational issues are with that. There's a real demand for low carbon solutions. So again, not only are buying departments now looking at what's the cheapest option, they're also being tasked with looking at what is the most sustainable option. And our clients are now looking, because they have to report downstream, they also have to look for energy data from us. So in terms of commercial case, we're also looking at net zero requirements. So really that's really important to start understanding what scope 1, scope 2 and scope 3 are. So scope 1 is really what we talk about, our direct emissions, company owned facilities and company owned vehicles. Scope 2 is those indirect emissions through the purchase of energy, for instance. Scope 3 is really around relating to the transport or production of your raw or core materials that are coming to you, as well as the production or transport of goods and services beyond your premises, and also looking at the transport of your staff to go to and from the workplace. Emissions, sadly, are going to cost your business. Carbon has already been monetized, and if you're paying for your emissions today, for each ton of carbon, you can realistically put about £55 per ton of carbon. So that really helps people to build the business case for reducing emissions over the coming years. So the idea is we reduce emissions to a point where we can't anymore, and that's when it's going to cost, so with an offset. So today you really need to understand what you produce, why, when and how much, and that really helps you then to reduce future costs. We definitely see how the UK government's commitments to net zero are already impacting businesses, and we're expecting more legislation to come by the end of this year. But what are the benefits for a business? Well, just to recap, up to 20% weighting on public contracts and the private sector are not too far behind. So there's that option of creating that competitive advantage. You can save up to 30% more time by using a tech solution like SustainIQ to capture this information. It allows you really to say, well, if I've invested in this process that is robust in collection of the data and in monitoring and measuring it, that you can build that trust into your clients, and you can also reduce the risk of non-compliance and avoid accusations of greenwashing. So in terms of where do we get started? Really need to understand the direction of travel of your specific industries, and to produce an ESG or sustainability strategy which includes net zero. But it's also really important to understand that the E is not any more important than the S or the G. That whole purpose of ESG is that it's an integrated approach. Include within that strategy a wide variety of roles and responsibilities across the business. This can no longer be the job of one person or one team of people to do this. As we have seen in previous slides, there's so many different departments that have access to this data and need the data for reporting. Engage and communicate with all the stakeholders to get their input. Integrate with existing management procedures. So if you've got ISO 14001, for example, and integrate with other software systems as well. Establish your baseline data, set targets and objectives that are achievable on the back of the data. Measure, monitor and report. So what is the data telling you about your performance? And use the information in the boardroom to inform decisions, strategies and plans on how you can use this data to drive your business forward. So at SustainIQ, we set out to try to demystify sustainability really. And we did this by building an easy to use platform, helping them to capture across 4 pillars. We designed the product across the 4 pillars because we believe that if you're entering data across these pillars, you have a holistic business intelligence approach to ESG, from socioeconomic impacts of your supply chains, your scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, and social value of your operations. We want to make it as hassle-free as possible to get the information into the system. So we have everything from manual entries, bulk uploads, we use QR codes, and we have a lot of integration through our API to existing software systems. We can also offer consultancy packages to help lead businesses to a point where they're ready to use a solution like this, and help them on their journey. Because I know there's quite a lot of companies that we're speaking to are saying we just don't know where to start, and we don't know if we're even ready for a software solution. So here's just kind of a quick snapshot of companies we work with. We're working with construction, transport, FMCG, manufacturing. We are working with IT companies, and we'd be more than happy to have conversations with anyone that's on this call who needs more advice or help. We're on over 1,000 sites across the UK and Ireland at the moment, across all of those various different regions as well. And I think, Sinead, we could jump into the case studies now. And I think we'll take questions probably after the case studies, if that's okay.
Good plan. No, that's great. No, thank you very much, Maria. I mean, that has just been a fantastic overview, and so many areas that, I know I wasn't aware of and I didn't think about it, but as a, in business and as an IT professional, we really have to get to terms of these to understand, because it affects us all. Like, I mean, you talked about, what's included in the ESG, and that was a really good starting point for us to know. And then getting hands on the data. I mean, in IT, it's all about data, but it's understanding how that can be captured and stuff like that as well too. And getting the supply chains right, and everybody who's in the mix, getting them working together and understand what your risks are, which is great. So, and as you mentioned, there are lots of hot topics there, and how things have evolved now to the 40%, which is a massive, when people are going after procurement, there's a massive overhead in procurement, and to be able to do the solution initially when you have your product, but that's what you focus on. But in addition to have all the sustainability, you will not be able to do that in the actual time frame of a bid turnaround. So it really is incumbent on people to get in early to do this, and having the right tools to do that, which will help you in your business. And that's why I think it's going to be brilliant now just to talk about how it is in the real world and use real life examples there. So I think, Maria, you've identified a really good 3 areas there for us to talk about, looking at it from the procurement side, and what does that mean for them, then looking at it in terms of the frameworks, because again, it's how people are doing their business, and then looking at, how ESG affects people's credentials and how Sustain IQ can help prove that, and how that's so important for the business. So yeah, I think that's great, Maria. If you want to, we kick off with the first one there. That from the bid manager.
I guess the first one that I wanted to showcase to you guys was how bid managers need access to this information. So this particular case study came from Jude Jackson, the bid manager at Heron Brothers Construction, and I guess. Really, I won't read it out, but what I'll give you as a snapshot really is that, she really needed the data to create responses to pre-qualification and tenders. And more than that, once she had access to that information, it was creating nice infographical or charted ways of getting that story across. Because you have to remember, you're in a tender process that there might be 20, 30 other shortlisted in that. And the people that are reading the tenders like concise information. They may not understand the information, but you need to provide it to them in such a way where they can. These are not ESG experts that are reading the tender. So it's really about getting that data to them in a tender submission in a way that's easy. But before Jude was using Sustain IQ, she actually told me there was times where she spent up to 8 weeks chasing the data. Like, that's such a waste of time and effort for her. And then she said, before she even, when she even got that information, then she realized there was gaps in it. Could she even put this into the tender? Can she stand over it? So you've all of those issues, when you're putting it in. But I suppose for her as well, she's not an ESG expert. She's a bid manager. With a real skill for English writing, not for deciphering the code of carbon emissions. So again, for her to get that information in a portal where she can access it easily, it saved her 1 day per tender response by having the information at hand. But it also, allowed her essentially the confidence to stand over accurate and reliable information that she was putting in there. And I think one of the greatest things that has come out of this through the tendering process is when the client sees that you've invested in a process whether it's through Sustain IQ or not, whether it's an environmental management system, whether it's, you know, ISO 14001, 9001, whether it's a tech solution like Sustain IQ, they can see you're taking it seriously. They can see that you have processes and measures in place to ensure that you're capturing the right data. So I thought this was an interesting look as well. So when we look at the benefits, the first benefit comes from the environment team. The second benefit comes from the buying department. The third benefit comes from the HR department. And the final two come from your community engagement or your social value managers. So you can see here, like, there are already within the benefits so many departments that are actually gaining from having this information at hand, but equally there's that many departments that would have need to feed back to Jude Jackson to write her tender response correctly. So I suppose that's a good snapshot of a bid manager's role within this as well.
Okay. So in looking at that then, Maria, what do you think then, you know, the bid managers, their role has evolved in terms of there? So, I mean, you know, it's really good the way Jude has now been able to get access to information, but prior to that, you know, she would never have had this information at the touch of a button. 8 weeks to do that, to get that. And going forward then, is this going to be more demand for them? You know, will it, you know, you said at the moment it's 40%. Do you think it's going to get higher as in the future for the information?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, the reality is it really just depends on the contract. So for instance, I know for the likes of construction companies, there are certain departments within the government that have really, really strict measures. Department of Defence, you've got education, because you have to remember the education department are going to be paying for the upkeep of the schools long into the future. So building, ensuring that a building is up to standard, and the materials used and the management of that building, the energy resources of it going into the future are so important to them. So a lot of their clients are actually now mandating that they have sustainability standards like BREEAM, LEED or CQUAL, for instance. And that is also coming about within the IT sector, because we know it ourselves from our public procurement, the amount of questions that we're now being asked. You see it, you know, everyone on this call is probably looking at G-Cloud currently. So there's a whole section on G-Cloud currently about your environmental and your social impacts. And once you're on it, you have to prove it. Do you know what I mean? So I suppose that's it's going right across all departments, but really I guess it's looking at a lot of our government departments now are looking at the longevity of actually managing their services and their estates.
Yeah, true. And as you say, like G-Cloud is a prime example. It's optional now, but that's not going to be, you know, some of it. You have to fill in one answer to it, but you will actually have to mandate going forward. Excellent.
And like, I mean, G-Cloud is essentially a framework.
Yes. Okay.
That you get recognised on, but a level under that is the requirements then that at least 10% of the tender below that has to be social value. So that is mandated. So to just get on the framework, yes, you have to answer a question that is a bit vague, I think, at the moment. But actually, once you go to level down and whoever's procuring from that framework, whether it's council or whether it's a government department, they are mandated now to have that 10% social value. And above that, they're usually including about 20% in the sustainability questions, which are predominantly environmental.
Brilliant. Okay, good. That's brilliant. Thank you. It really shows how important it's going to be. So that's our first case study. So moving on to, this is,
you know, talking about G-Cloud is probably a good segue onto this one. And the reason I wanted to pick this particular one is because it's just an example of one framework that some of our customers have to report on. And regardless of whether you're construction, whether you're manufacturing, transport or tech, the National TOMS framework for social value is the go-to at the moment. It is not easy to understand. It is really not easy to interpret, and probably for most people the biggest problem is gathering the data in a means that they can actually plug the proxies into it. So I suppose that's where we come in, where we're helping people to get that real clean data set so that they can then go and translate that into anything. So TOMS stands for themes, outcomes and measures. And within that, you'll see the kind of things that are being actually measured are jobs, growth, social, environmental and innovation. So again, really, really important, and all really consistent across government contracts especially. So what did they do to use Sustain IQ on this? So they were able to measure data in real time as required for client reporting platforms under the National TOMS framework. So it's not just at the end of a project, it's right throughout the project they need to report to this. We actually have a local social value framework here as well called Bisocial that quite a lot of companies are inputting into. And just as an example of that, we as a business are constantly looking at integrating and making the lives of our customers easier. So we are now looking at an integration where we can push the data directly to the Bisocial platform, for instance, and we're going to be doing that with lots of other frameworks. Just to give you another example, if you work for any number of the councils in London, they operate on a social value clause called Section 106, but every single council asks you for a different reporting template. So the problem and the onerous time and resource it takes to actually complete all of those. But what we've done in Sustain IQ is that once we have the core data, we can translate that into any template. So again, it's making life easier for people, not having to go out and fill out 6 different templates for the 6 different councils areas they're working in. So within this as well, I suppose when you're really looking at the kind of information that's being gathered from it, again, we've got the environmental there, but we've also got what the positive socioeconomic impact they were having in that local area through their supply chain and their subcontractors. And it also allowed them to showcase that they had 6 apprenticeship opportunities and 40 construction students on site for tours with the project.
Brilliant.
So, yeah.
So just looking at that there, I mean, there's so much information there, Maria, and like it is a lot of extra work to try and get that together. And you know what you're doing and what we need to do and what our role is actually, looking at making IT good for society and helping to connect that together. But leveraging the power of IT and the enhancements and innovation within IT, and also the data as well too. So I mean, just thinking about this, is there a future trend that you think is going to impact in ESG, like, in terms of, how can we do things differently? How can we bring innovation into this ESG and how that shape the future, do you think?
We had a bit of a chat earlier, which kind of prompted this in my mind as well, okay. Which is, we started in the space 4 years ago before ESG was even a term. And right. we recognized at that stage the need to draw an integrated reporting solution. What we found was people had different means of capturing environmental, their supply chains, their social and their governance elements. But the problem was none of that is speaking to each other. So what we did was we set aside to create a solution to pull all of that under one roof. So now we've that done. Great. Okay. The big struggle going forward, and the innovations that we need from this going forward, is to make it easier to even get the data into our system, which is all about automation. The future of this has to be automation, because the measures for reporting are going to become bigger and more stringent. And as they grow, the amount of data and the places the data are coming from and the ability to cleanse and make sure that we have good, clean data sets to stand over will be the issue. So if we can take that out of the hands of humans as much as possible, and we don't allow human error, then we can stand over the data even more. So again, really what we've been looking at is creating those connections. So to give you an example, one of the areas that's quite difficult for companies to get a handle on right now is Scope 3 emissions, which is all about your transport upstream and downstream. And during COVID, we had to adapt. people didn't want touch points. So we actually created a system of QR codes. So all deliveries, all visitors, and all employees that are coming onto site are scanning a QR code. And that way we're capturing both health and safety who's on site, but equally then we're getting the mileage associated with their travel so that we can create that carbon emissions from that. So that was just kind of one innovation that we had. We're also looking at where are we actually capturing that information. So that might be the people that actually arrive on site. But if you've got a company car, for instance, you're claiming mileage from the finance department. So we're now integrating with finance systems. You might have vehicle tracker systems on your fleet. So now we're integrating with the vehicle tracker systems to make that as easy as possible so that it doesn't have to go through an onerous process to capture that data in the first place. So for me, really, that trend going forward is how are we going to automate as much as possible. And I think probably a level above that is in each sector. Who's going to take control in each sector to try to drive the demands of the sector and to provide solutions specific to sectors? Because I think that to me is the big challenge going forward to meeting like net zero targets, right into the future.
Brilliant, excellent. Okay, well, I mean, it is the way it's going forward. But as IT professionals, that we sit in that that space. So that's great to know that we're all, I suppose, everything is convergence, really, to be honest. And we're getting the best of all worlds. Excellent. So have we one final actual case study to go through, which would be great.
So the final one I wanted to bring up is because you will see there, Europe's first eco-mosque. That's a pretty big claim to make. If you're going to be making that claim, you better be able to stand over, as far as I'm concerned. So again, how did Gilbert Ash do this? So they had to meet a BREEAM excellent standard. So that's an audit process. In order to get through that process, you need the data to be able to showcase it. But equally, outside of all of that, then they were able to showcase that they had a process in place for doing this, not only for themselves but also for all their subcontractors. So subcontractors in the supply chain were feeding into this. The materials that were being bought were feeding into this. Transport and travel was being captured, waste, water, and energy. Everything you'll see here on this particular one. So again, recording all waste that was transferred off-site. They ensured compliance with legislation for waste. They were able to capture energy and water, see all the biodiversity logs on site. It made life easier because once you were making a claim to have the first eco-mosque in Europe, you have regular meetings with the client to make sure that you're on track for that. So those progress meetings were really easily tracked because we've got real-time data going into the system. As well as that, then they also had considered constructor scheme audits. So that's the social value element. So really showcasing what impacts do we have on the local community while we're here building this. And that takes into consideration things like diversity. So again, they had diversity initiatives on site because they were mandated based on the demographic of the people that were using the end product. They had to have the same demographic in the workforce, which is quite difficult to do, especially in central London. So again, that was being able to, the considered constructor auditors were able to come back in then and see everything at a glance on Sustain IQ because it was all sitting there. They were able to track all materials, so how much certified timbers and recycled materials were there. And then it meant that the buying team was able to turn around and look at their supply chain and say how much of our supply chain is it within a 30-mile radius of the site, so that they can ensure that the local people are actually getting the most out of that build. So that just gives you a wee bit of an idea here. I think this is one of the best stats that we've seen come out of anything. 75% less time spent on compiling data each week. So they brought it down from reporting for 2 hours weekly to 30 minutes. So like that's a lot of time for a site manager to have that should be focusing on ensuring the quality of the build or the health and safety on site as well. So that just gives you a kind of an idea of, I guess the reputational risk that you might have if you cannot stand over a claim like that. They would be very quickly pulled up on greenwashing if they weren't able to prove that this actually was and did have its eco credentials.
Yeah, totally. And that's what came to mind there too, because it was such an immense project, but also as well that too in terms of reputation, it's getting into a much granular level to be able to say that you're procured within 30 miles and the number of people involved. So it really is about knowing your business, but given the evidence. So you think if they had been able to do this and to show the evidence, how would that have impacted their business, either for this customer or other customers, do you
Well,
think?
I know for a fact they have been able to bid for other sustainability-led projects that have sustainability, credentials or titles on them now as a result, because they can showcase that they've already done it. It's kind of like in any procurement, and Gilbert Ash wouldn't really do a lot of public procurement. It would be a lot of more private procurement or private companies that they have as clients. So again, it's really showcasing that you can stand over your credentials there. But also, like, I mean, the reputational risk of that, the word goes out fairly quickly if you're over your timescales or above budget. It'll certainly go over it if you haven't met the requirements that were set in a contract. But equally, just to bring this back to commercial, if you don't, if it was set in this contract that it was a BREEAM excellent building, it had to be built to that standard. And if you can't prove that at the end of the project, you will have 30% of the package held back. So 30% of what you're being paid for that project will be held back until you can prove it. So, I mean, if you know anything about construction especially, they don't really make those margins, huge margins. So 30% puts them in the red massively. They might be making 8% of a margin on the whole project. So again, you can't afford to lose that kind of money.
Yeah, yes, they go very much hand in hand. Incredible. Listen, Maria, that's been absolutely fabulous.